Hi, welcome back to Detective Story. I'm Mike Hammond. Thank you very much for joining in again. I really appreciate it. Today we're moving on to episode 2 of the Magdalena Idzikowska case, which again is a kind of a description of a case that we worked on that took much of our career to get resolution to at a time where we were still working on other cases. But this case in particular, it was a lot of detail work, a lot of really kind of grinding street investigation that really gives you some insight, I think, as to what a homicide investigation really looks like, especially from the perspective of a Chicago homicide detective on the west side of Chicago, obviously. I'm joined again in this episode by Chris Kafcas and Mike Pietryla, my partner, and we're going to kind of wrap up this investigation for you in today's episode. I hope you're enjoying it. I hope you're finding it interesting. If you have questions, anything that's not answered in these episodes that you're curious about, please reach out. I enjoy the interaction. Again, my email is the best way to get me, and that's mike@detectivestory.net. And I will respond to you and answer any questions you have or criticisms or whatever, however you'd like to interact. I'm happy to get it. So we'll move on with today's episode. Again, keep in mind now that the material discussed in these episodes are of a pretty heavy nature. And we're talking about murder and violence, violent death. If those things upset you, give some real thought as to whether this is for you. I'm not trying to scare anybody off, but I want to be realistic and not cause anybody further trauma. So here we go again, episode 2 of Magdalena Idzikowska, Maggie. And I hope you enjoy it, and I will talk to you afterwards. Thank you very much. I'd like to take a moment from the program to have a real talk about safety and security. Toward that end, I would like to introduce you to my friends over at Blue Knight Security Solutions, your ultimate partner in protection. Blue Knight Security Solutions isn't just your average check your ID at the door security company. They're a team of elite detectives, investigators, and law enforcement professionals with unparalleled expertise. Especially in this realm, I would not vouch for just anyone. I confidently endorse Blue Knight, however, because I've seen and I know their skill sets firsthand. Whether you need their real-world investigative prowess or securing your home, business, synagogue, church, or event, Blue Knight has you covered. From risk assessment to tailored security plans, they'll ensure your safety is priority number one. Please don't get caught in the trap of having the illusion of security. Make sure you are actually making yourself, your loved ones, businesses, and community actually more secure. Blue Knight Security Solutions provides street-smart operators who can handle any situation. Heading out for the evening, worried about your kids heading out safely? Forget the uncertainty of ride shares or cabs. Blue Knight offers secure transportation with trained security operatives who prioritize your safety every step of the way and will get you where you're going with the confidence that you are well protected. Contact Blue Knight Security Solutions today at 773-706-4920 or visit BlueKnightSecuritySolutions.com. That's night, like Knights of the Round Table, BlueKnightSecuritySolutions.com. Don't forget to mention my name, and I promise they'll make you feel like family, because your peace of mind matters. Hi, welcome back to Detective Story. Thanks for joining us again. This is episode 2 of the Magdalena Idzikowska investigation. Again, I'm joined by my guest, Chris Kafcas, my buddy and my old partner, Mike Pietryla. I really appreciate them joining us for this. And we are going to continue on with how this investigation played out. So thanks for joining in. As always, we appreciate it. Please download, subscribe, give us a review if you like it. It helps us out a great deal, and we really do appreciate it. All right, Chris, take it away, buddy.
So let me get this straight. You and the tank commander are driving back from Cubs Foods out in Joliet, which is, for people that don't live in the Chicagoland area, is about, like 45 minutes to an hour, depending on traffic?
Yeah, depending on traffic.
On a good day?
Yeah.
It was Joliet State Prison that was the beginning of the Blues Brothers.
Right.
Just a note.
That's correct.
Right.
And you get a phone call from another policeman.
Yep.
telling you that, well, basically that his informant is the same person that you're looking for? Or does it goes in the reverse
goes the
order?
opposite way, actually.
Right.
He had called me right after we left the house on Superior saying, hey, were you just at this house on West Superior asking about a murder? And I said, yeah, we didn't say anything about a murder, but yeah, we were there. He said, well, I have an informant there. If you need anything, let me know. I'll reach out to him. And, of course, just out of courtesy, I didn't ask him his informant's name or anything. So then we go to the Cubs Foods, trying to tie up those phone records and the woman who'd gotten calls and this guy who we believe had the phone, possessed the phone because, of the variety of calls. And then the Cubs Foods manager in Joliet identifies the guy for us, tells us his name is William Moore, and he tells us that his emergency contact is the house we'd been to on Superior and the woman who told us, I don't know anybody, I don't know anything, right? So then we get back in the car and start our way back in, and I called my buddy, the policeman, and I said, hey, I wouldn't normally ask such a thing, but it's kind of important. Is your informant's name Bill Moore? And he said, how do you know that?
Yeah.
And I said, well, brother, I think he's the guy I need to talk to. I mean, I don't know that he's our killer yet, but I know he had a phone and I need to talk to him. And at that point, my buddy's like, well, he goes, to be very frank, I know him, I've dealt with him, but he's actually my father's informant for a long time. And he knows him and still talks to him. So I'll reach out to my dad. I'll have him give you a call. So thank you. Complicated a little bit because his father is a commander in the police department.
Like high-ranking.
High-ranking guy. Good man, like my buddy. But still, it's an issue that, like, all right, we're going to have to deal something with this. So then I get on the phone and call Mike, who's in the office, and I say, hey, man, this guy's name is William Moore, whatever you find out about it. And by the time we in the office, like, you had run him, right? And we're like...
Inside and out. Pictures, background, everything. I had everything on this guy.
And then his phone records, then that it all become like, this guy had that phone.
Right.
There is no question that he had that phone because multiple calls to his home address, to the house on Superior, to this girl who said he was dating him.
Cubs Foods.
And it turns out he was a floater for years for Cubs Foods, filling in at different ones when they were short of people. So we're like, this guy had the phone, right? Now, we don't know now for sure he's a killer, but he had that phone.
Right. So at the same time that this is going on, there's another piece of evidence or another piece of the puzzle, as it turns out, because it wasn't used as evidence, but it helped kind of formulate everything. You guys still have this videotape floating around out there somewhere, right?
That's correct.
Yes.
And the process of trying to get stuff off of that videotape is, as I understand it, problematic at the very least.
We ran into a lot of problem with the tapes. We did have the tape. We even viewed the tape and we looked at it, and it was kind of, when we were looking at it, it was an exterior camera with a cover on it, a plastic cover. Well, that day or that night or that week was raining, snowing. It was terrible weather. The problem is that you see more of the dripping coming off the
Every time a raindrop hit the cover, the front cover of that housing that the camera's inside of, it just exploded in light. Like, all the ambient light.
Because it's 2001.
Yeah,
the
the technology
was
was
made in 1982.
Right.
Yeah.
And so then you couldn't see anything. And on top of that, it was a VHS tape.
Right.
And
for those of you of a younger generation, it's a thing about this big that went into a machine and you had to manually rewind it and fast forward it on or it had a remote that was attached
we also
by
used
wire.
to listen to our music on 8-track. People have no idea what these things are today.
So you have this and you're not really getting anything off of it. But
no, the only thing of value we were able to get off of it was our forensic video people are pretty good. And one of the problems, too, with it was on a multi-camera system.
Right.
So every few seconds, it would switch to a different camera throughout this factory, right? So then you had to isolate that camera, right? And then they were able to do that. And the way it had value was if you watch 8 hours or whatever it was a little less than 8 hours, but it's November, so whenever it gets light out, 7 in the morning, 7:30 in the morning, I don't know. But you could see her car pull in right at midnight, almost.
Well, you see the headlights.
The headlights.
We couldn't determine that was her car, but we see headlights come in and park where that car was found. I'll let you go ahead. I didn't mean to interrupt you.
No, it's accurate. That's all you could see was the headlights pull in, right? Couldn't see anything else. It's too blurry, it's too rainy, all that stuff. And then just a few minutes later, you see a car pull in behind her. And that car's there for a few minutes.
It's there for a little bit, yeah.
And it backs out. Unfortunately doesn't drive on, which would have taken it by the camera. It backs up, turns around, and drives out the other way. Can't make out the model of the car.
Nothing.
Can't see nothing except the lights. But if you watch, which we did several times, like 7 hours later, you can watch the lights. Her lights stay on and don't change. Then when it's daylight, you can clearly see that it's Maggie's car, and you see the door open. So definitively, she come there at midnight, and she never left.
Never left.
Right?
And there was one person, theoretically, that was there for a short period of time who would most likely be your killer.
Right.
So do you try and have that tape cleaned up?
We do. Our people couldn't do anything with it, and we were like going to send the FBI. But then somebody told us that NASA, like the space people, are really good at it. Like they can do things other people can't do, which makes sense, right? But nobody had ever considered it. So we're like, we reach out to NASA, which seemed like this is all right, right? And they were cool. They're like, yeah, I mean, but we have a process. And the process is you have to hand carry it down here. And then we have the local sheriff's department who will accompany you in. And you have to sit with that deputy while
There's a name for this process, right? It's
Chain of custody.
Yeah. We call it now the tank commander process. But
or the little guy.
His name. But and the reason they do that is they don't want to be part of the chain of custody. They don't want to have to send somebody up to testify. They want us and this deputy from down there to be independent witnesses. They just don't want to be tied up with it. It's just a logistics thing. It's fair, right? So we're like, awesome. We'll send it down there, right? Or we'll come down there and do it. So we're making plans. But then, I don't know when that was, 2002, 2000. It's easy to determine because the second space shuttle tragedy occurred. That second space shuttle that blew up and killed all those astronauts happens soon after we make this agreement. And they call us and they're like, sorry, everything's off the table. We got to work on this, which of course is understandable, like, sure, please. So we're like, that videotape, I don't know if it's ever going to get it. It's a super long shot anyway, but that's the way it worked out, right? So then we put it back in inventory, kind of forgot about it, and moved on with doing other things with the case. And then one day, several years later, NASA calls us and says, hey, are you guys still interested in having that tape reviewed? And like, yeah, we are. That'd be great, So the tank commander flies down there and they sit and do it, but they just couldn't do any more than what we could see.
Already been done.
You know what I mean? So it's just a kind of a fascinating story. Like NASA, cool.
Also, I got to think another frustrating piece of this puzzle, a piece that could very well make the case suddenly just turns out.
Well, ultimately in trial, it certainly made it easy for the state's attorney, who was Bill Delaney, and his partner, who's still working. So I haven't talked to him to get his permission, but I did talk to Bill. Bill, the great state's attorneys did a great job prosecuting this case, but it just it gave them really great ammunition for that closing argument. Say, look, what else would you have liked for these guys to have done? You know what I mean?
Right.
Like, it went to silly degrees almost.
To NASA. They went to NASA. They went to NASA.
Yeah, NASA. And it also eliminates the argument from the defense attorney. Well, you guys found this tape. How come it wasn't processed? Something you didn't like?
You went to NASA.
Yeah, and it was done, and they ran through their
talk to those guys.
Technology, the best in the world, and there was nothing at that time. Maybe today they could do it, but at that time they could clean it up so far.
Right. But that tape would play a part until the very And I'll explain that later, but that tape had relevance until the bitter end.
So now you have the name of William Moore.
Mm-hmm.
You have information that he is also a confidential informant for someone high-ranking in the police department. You got to be scratching your heads and say, like, what other turn can this make? And then what happens?
Yeah, I mean, we were kind of like, wow, how about this caper? Huh? I mean, it just was, there was no predicting what turn it was going to take next. But he had to be talked to. The other thing we needed to know, or we wanted to know really badly, was, is there any connection between him and Maggie, right? So first things first, we talked to the commander, who was awesome. He's like, yeah, I'll get a hold of him and have him come to my office, which is a little unconventional, but he's commander. If that's what he wants to do, that's the way we'll do it. I mean, unconventional in that we prefer to do interviews like in our space, kind of, you know what I mean? Especially with a guy that's potentially a suspect, which this guy certainly was, because of the phone records. I think suspect's about as strong a word as you could. Person of interest is the words they like to use now. But
right. Yeah. He was a suspect.
He was a suspect, right?
Yeah.
So in the interim, we had she worked at a place called Union Health with her mother. And Union Health is, I don't know exactly what they do over there. They're kind of a clearinghouse for medical.
I think Union Health is like the medical facility for unions. You work as a factory worker and they have a particular union. Well, you need a physical to get the job. You go to Union Health. They do it.
Right.
So they worked there. They were employed by this company, which is in the medical section.
Maggie, her mother, and a good friend of Maggie's by the name of Tamara. And we had talked to Tamara before. Or no, maybe we hadn't, but she had been interviewed.
No, I think we did talk to her before, and she told us her relationship with Maggie pretty much, but she could not. I think she may even have given us the current boyfriend's name. I think. Jawan. Yeah, Jawan, who we eventually ruled out of this thing. But she definitely now needed to take a look at some pictures of people and be re-interviewed. And anybody else at the office, but she was the one she palled around with the most at work.
Sure. So we decided, well, let's go by. So we scheduled the interview with the commander, with William Moore. And then I'm not sure, it might have been the same day, but very closely before the interview with William Moore, we go by to talk to Tamara. And what wasn't my shining moment as a homicide detective. I had the file, kind of our working file. I had a big picture of William Moore, like a full page printout of a mugshot of him, And so we're talking to her, and eventually we're going to get around to, like, we're going to mention his name and ask you,
Right.
She's not a witness, so this really isn't a critical issue. It's just not ideal way to go about things, but I'm trying to find something to ask her, and I'm flipping through this file, and you were there, the tank commander was there, I think that was it, and she goes, hey, can I ask you a question? I said, sure. She goes, what? Do you have a picture of William Moore in there? Bill Moore in there? And I'm like, yeah.
Yeah, we do.
I do.
As a matter of
so I
fact.
pulled a picture. I said, do you know him? She goes, I know him well. Why do you have a picture of him? I said, well, so now if she's a witness, that's a problem, right? Like if she'd seen the murder happen and she's going to have to identify him and line up, I have really screwed that up.
And we didn't know at that point.
Right.
So that's the problem.
Yeah. So because she's not a witness, it turns out not to be a big deal, but it's not ideal. But anyway, I said, she goes, well, I worked at Cups Foods with him, which, is
Just solidifies that.
And I said, did you ever introduce him to Maggie? And she goes, yeah, I did. He came by on Sweetest Day.
Valentine's Day, Sweetest Day, one of them. Yeah.
Mm-hmm. And to see Tamara. And Tamara never
Brought her flowers and
dated him.
candy. I remember that. He did.
And brought her sandwich. And he said, Maggie went out with me, and I introduced him. And I said, did they have any conversation? She goes, they had a little conversation. She goes, I know they exchanged phone numbers. So we knew then before we go interview William Moore that he knows Maggie.
And he has her phone number.
And he has her phone number, correct. So we knew that piece of information. Tamara didn't know much more than that about them, right?
That was a work relationship, somebody you work with that you don't particularly associate with afterwards.
Right.
They were friends at work, and they had lunch together and things like that.
Right. Tamara, I think, didn't date men. So she said they were friends. He was always trying to hit on her, but she didn't play that way. So, so we know then that's true, right? So now we go interview William Moore at the commander's office, me, Mike, and the tank commander,
Who takes the lead on that?
I did. I did.
Did a wonderful job. I sat back and watched him have William Moore almost implicate himself in the manner in which he did the interview. It was outstanding.
Walk me through what happens in that office.
Well, so part of the reason, to be fair, that played out that way is there were times where Sam Manto was gone, Mike's working on other things, tank commander. I was the most consistent thread through a lot of the case, so I knew the fix. Also, tank commander and Mike were like senior guys, more experienced guys. So the plan was I'd walk him through and they would kind of hear it out. And then if it wasn't going away, they would kind of, let me know or guide me, whatever. So, and the way it played out was this was a guy who'd been an informant for 18 years, perfectly comfortable talking to the police. And
does he have a record?
Oh, yeah.
He did have
a record.
When he was younger, he had pretty significant record, armed robberies. Interestingly enough, the only thing that he'd been arrested for in the years prior to was domestic violence. A woman who we interviewed on the South Side, he dated him for a short time, which was an interesting story in itself and telling. But he had not had a criminal record in some time at the time we interviewed him. Very frankly, as good a man as the commander was, and as much as I thought of him, it was a little uncomfortable in that scenario, right? Because that's not generally the way we do things. They have a relationship, whatever, but it actually worked out really well and to our benefit. So I basically just started. I was real straight with him, and I said, Mr. Moore, and he said, hey, call me Bill. And he calls me Bill, And he had a couple, the guys, we knew guys who had known him when he was an informant commander who worked for the commander, and they knew him as Goldie. The girl who dated him called him Benji. The commander called him Bill, and he told me, call me Bill. And so I said, okay, Bill. I said, we're here to talk about this investigation work on this. And I said, I pretty much showed him, do you know this girl? Showed him a picture of Magdalena. And he goes, no, I never saw her before in my life. I said, are you sure? And he said, no, I've never seen her before, And I said, well, do you know a woman named Tamara?
Excuse me.
And he goes, oh, yeah, Tamara, our friends I work with. So I said, we talked tomorrow. She said that he introduced you guys, like you met, you had lunch one day. And he goes, show me a picture again. So I showed him a picture again. He goes, oh, yeah, I remember that, which is fair, right? Okay, whatever. And I said, so tomorrow says you guys exchange phone numbers. I don't remember that, but I guess maybe, but I don't think I ever talked to her. I said, you sure about that? You never talked to her at all? And he said, yeah, I'm pretty sure. I said, okay. I said, this was the first real kicker, right? I said, do you recall this time period, 2001, and this interview took place in 2000, 2004, May of 2004 was when we interviewed him. So 3 years later, I said, "You remember 2001? Did you have a cell phone you carried?" And he says to me, straight as an arrow, "I never owned a cell phone in my life." I said, "Never owned a cell phone?" And he said, "No." I said, "What's that on your hip?" He had a cell phone
holder
on his hip.
Yeah.
And he's like, "Oh, yeah, I just got this, And I'm like, "You just got it?" I said, "So, like, if I check your phone records, it's going to show what you've had it a week?" And he first started showing a little nervous
hesitancy.
And the commander, who was kind of trying to stay out of it, says, "Bill, like, you had a cell phone for years. I always call you on a cell phone." And he's like, Yeah. I just don't normally carry it. He had some story, and I just let him go with that. I'm like, okay. I said, "So you very likely had a cell phone back then?" He said, "Yeah, I guess." I said, "So does this number ring a bell to you?" And he goes, "Nah, I have that phone." I said, so I pulled the phone records. I said, "Where do you live, Bill?" He tells me, and I wrote it down. I said, "All right. Yeah, you got family at this 4800 block of Superior?" He goes, "Yeah, I do." I said, "And you work Cubs Foods?" I said, "How many Cubs Foods?" He goes, "I worked at all of them. I was kind of a runner fill-in." I said, "How about this one?" "Yeah, this one. Yeah. I said, "And you're dating a woman at the time named Hale?" He goes, "Yeah, that's right. I was dating her." I said, "You remember she lived on Lawndale, whatever?" I just went down. And he's like, yeah. I said, "Hey, I want to show you something. Look at these phone records. That number I just described you, look at this. Called your house. Well, you see your father lives there, right?" You say, "Yeah. He was sick. Called there 10 times. Called one of the health. Called this Cubs Foods, this Cubs Foods, this Cubs Foods, this Cubs Foods." I said, "What's the chance that somebody else had that phone? I was calling over. Somebody stalking you?" And he kind of looked at the commander, and I could see, right? I mean, he was getting nervous, and he's like, "Oh, I guess that probably was my phone. It's the only thing that makes sense. I just don't remember." I said, "Oh, that's fair. It's hard to remember if you change phones." I said, and I can't remember how this exactly shook out, but I know, and this is how it's good to have a couple of more experienced detectives with me at that. I mean, I've been a homicide detective at that time only like 3 years. It was a busy 3 years. But,
Oh, yeah.
but I mean, it had only been 3 years. These guys have been a lot longer. But I could feel that he was getting uncomfortable and the commander said, "Bill, would you like to talk to me alone? Is there something you want to say?" And I'm like, No.
Yeah.
No. I wouldn't want to say that. He's a commander of police,
Right.
And I didn't want to come out and say it, but I'm trying to give him next day, But I looked over at Mike and Ray, and they're like shaking their head
Go
at
ahead,
me.
let him do it.
Yeah. And
What was your thought process on that?
Because I was viewing this whole interview, and I'm watching reactions. Mike's questions, William Moore's reaction while he's answering, whether it's true or not, and the commander's reactions. He was getting aggravated because I sensed that the commander knew he wasn't being forthcoming with us at all. So he wanted a minute to share with him what and not that I've gone through that before, but I said, this might be to the benefit. He's going to tell him, listen, if you didn't do anything wrong, let them ask their questions, answer their questions, and let's go. Or did you do something wrong? I think he had a private conversation with him. And I think at that point, he probably lied to him.
Yeah.
Or said, okay. I think he helped facilitate us getting his denials. Not that he had told him to do that or anything like that. It's just that I don't think we would have got that far with Bill Moore if we had him in the office in an interview room and the commander wasn't there. There was a lot of outside pressure on him from the commander because that's his informant for years.
So he comes back in?
So we go outside and we let them talk. And I was a little frustrated, but he and tank commander kind of talked, no, man, let them do their thing. Let's see what he says.
See what happens.
He was really getting, I'm like, yeah, you're right. So we go back in, and I think that the commander, they had a pretty close relationship, which is fair. They've known each other for like 18 years. He got him a job at Cubs Foods. But the commander he believed, and Bill Moore said this, like set his life right. Got him off the streets, got him. The truth was that to a degree, I think Moore was telling what he wanted to hear all that time.
Right.
But, I understood the relationship, but I have to be honest about, and we've talked about this at length, because very frankly, he's deceased now, so I don't mind talking about it, but our commander was not at all happy with the commander. He's like, why is he doing this? Why is he doing? And we're telling boss, like, it's his informant. Let him do his thing. And because our commander was he was a high strung dude, and he luckily for us, he liked me, but also the tank commander's a Marine. Our commanders are Marine. They speak this, the language. I love the Marines. That crazy language they always have. And so he kind of let it go. But there was that pressure there, and we had to walk this kind of line. But the actual commander who knew Bill Moore, he was great. I do think though, when we came back in, Bill Moore had a story that was fantastic. It was an awesome thing to hear. He goes, I lied to you. I told the commander, because the commander comes in and he goes, all right, guys, I'm going to let him tell it, but he's been not telling you the whole story. So Bill explained it. Bill said, I'm sorry, I lied. He goes, I had that phone. He goes, I did have that phone. I remember having it. I talked to him. And he goes, I did know Maggie. He goes, I never had a relationship with her. I never dated her. I never did anything like that with her. But I lied about that. I said, okay. I said, all right, so what did you do with the phone? What happened? And he goes, well, I actually sold that phone to a hype, meaning like a drug addict in the neighborhood. I said, oh, really? When did you do that? He goes, right before Thanksgiving, 2001. And I looked at Ray, and I looked at Mike and the tank commander, and they were both kind of looking at me like, there you go, kid, And I looked at the commander and I said, boss, please. And the commander's like, hey, Bill, make a lot of sense. I said, all right, well, what's the hype's name? And he goes, Johnson, Gregory Johnson, he tells me. I said, all right, so how do I find Gregory? He goes, well, unfortunately, he said he was killed doing an armed robbery shortly after that. He was a bad guy. So I'm like, so this is your story now? I said, so Mr. Johnson gets a phone and gets called. But here's my question. Who gets a phone, keeps calling your house, and keeps calling Cubs Foods?
Right. After that. And the commander, to his credit, was like, hey, Bill, come on, man. Like you're embarrassing me. This is, I think he got a short story of like, okay, I lied to him. I had the phone, but I got rid of it. I think he was willing to buy that. But once I started flushing it out, the commander's like, hey, man, don't make an ass of me, man. This is
right.
And he's like, Bill, come on. And he's like, yeah, it didn't happen. I said, there's no Greg Johnson. Right? He goes, well, there is a Greg Johnson, but I didn't sell him. I said, all right, so you had the cell phone. I said, all right, so tell me then about Maggie. And he said, I knew her. She called me a bunch of times. She's trying to hook up, but he goes, I never hooked up. I said, never once. And he said, no, I never. I said, you never had like sex with him, that was a tough question to ask, right?
Well, I think you led up to it. Did you ever date her? Started there. Yeah. Did you ever go out with her? Did you ever take her to a movie? Right. Did you do this with her? And then did you ever kiss her? Then I got to. So what you're telling me, you had no physical relationship with this girl. And because I was watching him, and it was like watching a master clock guy that fixes clocks. He did it exactly right, and he led him right into him saying that never had sex with her, never had oral sex, never did this. I never did that. Now, for our purposes, we're done, okay? Because we got him saying this, not and in front of the commander. So it
wasn't quite done.
I'm sorry.
It wasn't quite done.
No, not quite. Oh no, it wasn't quite done. We weren't going to do anything because we still had to do other things.
The Derek Coleman thing.
Derek Coleman, right? Go ahead. I'll let you finish that because I don't recall.
Were you headed there? I'm sorry. No, go ahead.
No. I was just saying how you did it. You did it exactly the right way to lead him up to casual acquaintance to I never had sex with this girl.
Right. So definitively now, we're in a position where if we can get his DNA,
right,
and it's his, he's our killer. He's denying,
right.
He's phone records, he's this and that. I mean, not that it would be that simple. There'd be work to do, but I did. The way it shook out was I said, all right, so did you see her 2 days after Thanksgiving 2001? And he's like, no, definitively, and it's like, you have to think about it, and I think most normal people would be like, let's see.
3 years ago?
Yeah, 3 years ago, Thanksgiving.
Where was I?
After.
Yeah.
He's like, no. I said, well, Bill, I'm going to show you something, man. She calls you, and she called you 5 or 6 times, right? You said, yeah. I said, she calls you 11:40 that night, and then you guys talk, I assume. I mean, she's on the phone with your phone for 20 minutes. She leaves her house. She goes. She's murdered. And then you guys never talk on the phone again. And you could see him. I mean, there's a physical change in him. It was very dramatic to see. He started sweating.
Yep.
And he was looking at the commander. And at this point, the commander's like,
yeah, the commander sees what's
I
happening.
want to hear this myself, I mean, to the commander's credit, he stuck through it because I think that a lot of people have been at some point would have been like, I'm going to leave this to you guys.
Yeah, I'm out of here. Yeah.
Because he's kind of, he made himself a witness to this conversation, which is to his credit, I mean, especially a guy his rank didn't have to do that. And he said, all right, man, I'm worried about telling you this. I said, I mean, tell me what you can. Now, I said, he said, I was with a guy. He's a scary dude, but I put him on the phone. I said, all right, well, I said, who was the guy? I said, I know it scares you, but man, we're getting down to the nitty gritty here, right? He said, well, they call him DC. And I'm like, I know. The only one DC's talking about. I said, all right. I said, I know DC. I wonder if it's the same one. He goes, probably. I said, well, all right, just tell me his name, And he said, Derek Coleman. And they're like, yeah, same DC. I had a history with Derek Coleman, West Side gang, tough guy, right? And not a pleasant history myself, But I said, well, how's that shake out? And he said, well, I was playing dice with him. He goes, she had been asking me to hook her up with some players. So he goes, I'm playing dice with DC that night. And she calls me. And he said, I put DC on the phone with her, and they talked. And he goes, I think they talked about maybe hooking up. I'm not sure. I don't know what they did. And that's the last that talk. And I said, so you're telling me that you talked to her and then maybe DC? So that opens itself up to all kinds of cool stuff to talk about, and for any attorneys out there that are concerned in listening, I had Mirandized him inside the door, giving him his Miranda warnings, but I looked at Mike and the tank commander, and they're both kind of shaking their head like, it's time, and it was time to say, oh, give him the out, which is the play, right? Always when you talk to somebody like that, you want him to have an out. That's how to. So the out, it was time for the out. And I said, all right. I said, okay, that makes sense. I can check that out. So, but you never had any relationships? Yeah, we went over there. I said, so there's an easy way, Bill, to get yourself out from underneath this. And that's to give us a buccal swab. Do you know what that is? He goes, no, it's a DNA sample. Take your DNA. And now, we didn't tell him that there's DNA on the scene, that she had sperm inside her. We didn't had mentioned any of that, But, man, he got pale and was sweating, and he looked at the commander, and I don't know about them, but I'm holding my breath, and the commander's just like, you didn't do anything wrong, Bill. Now's the time, And he's like, oh, okay, all right. So we can take buccal swabs from people, and we had during the course of this, we're trained to do it and that. But it's better to have an evidence technician do it for a suspect, if you can. Sometimes you just can't. You know what I mean? Like,
right.
We go to Nashville and interview that guy. The tank commander and I took DNA. There's nothing wrong with it as long as you follow chain of custody, do all that stuff. But it's just better and more official to have an evidence. So either him or tank commander went outside, ordered an evidence technician to come there, and he got there pretty quick. But that was some of the longest, whatever it was, 30 minutes.
It wasn't that long, especially waiting for an ET. 20 minutes or something like that. He did show up. For us, that's quick.
20 minutes from me because
but we were on pins and needles that he would change his mind or this or that. But you had him sign the consent. Or no, the consent was signed, and he agreed to do it. And when he did it, I said, "This is great. We got the buckle, so now we just."
Even the ET was, when we went outside, ET was a little freaked out because of where I'm leaving out where we did the interview in respect of the commander. It's just his office, but unusual. And ET's like, what the hell's going on? And we're like, it's just worked out this way. He goes, that guy's wrong. Like, his mouth was dry. I thought he was going to faint. I said, yeah, man.
And I still say, the fact that the commander was there, in spite of what our commander did not like that we conducted it there, put the pressure. That was a lot of pressure for him.
External pressure for him to continue. At this point, I mean, the guy's a hardened criminal, right? Is he thinking that he's going to get out of this?
I asked myself to this day. Mike and I have talked about it. And Commander, I think he just didn't want to say no in front of the commander.
Yeah.
You know what I mean? I think that because he knew. I mean, he had to know. He
had to know.
And maybe he was just hoping that it wouldn't hit or he'd come up with another story. Or I think he was painted into a corner that he wanted out of, and he was going to do what it took to get out of it. And it's an odd thing. You know what I mean?
So you leave with the DNA swab is gone with the
evidence
technician, and you guys end the interview with that, right? And the next step is to get a hold of DC, I suppose. Say,
yeah, that's correct. That's correct. Well, the first thing we did was contact our sergeant at the time, called the crime lab and asked if they would put a rush on it, because again, these can be 6 months. But, explain the circumstance, explain that this might be the suspect in this. And they agreed to rush it, which is great. And they can do. I think it only took them 6 days.
It didn't take long.
7 days. I mean, the FBI can get this done in a matter of hours now. But back then, it was first of all, the ISP doesn't have the resource of the FBI, but also it was just a long process because there's so many, whatever. But they agreed to do it. They got back pretty fast. But yes, the next step was to go talk to DC Coleman. And I was like, this is going to be a tough one because he and I have a bit of a history, you know what I mean?
Not a good one.
Not a good one because he's a guy that was not fond of the police. And his little ballywick there, he's a big dude, a lot of control over it. His family owned a pretty well-known barbecue joint on the west side. And so was it you and I that went to his mother's house?
Yes, I think so.
So we went to his mother's house where he thought he was staying out in the suburbs, and he was there. And, you know, he was a little bit like, hey, man, why you bothering me at my mom's house? I said, look, I don't think you're in any trouble here, but this is an important thing we're talking about, you know. And he was like, to my surprise, he was like, yeah, I know Bill Moore. I know Goldie. And I said, well, so here's the story, man. He's saying that we're working on the murder of a girl that was killed. He's saying that he had a phone, but she called. He put you on a phone. You were in a car, leaving a dice game. I told him exactly what he said. And he was like, that's absolutely bullshit. He goes, I ain't never been in a car with Goldie. I ain't never talked to a phone. He's never hooked me up with any women. That's all bullshit. And I said, all right, man. I said, you willing to, I seen get yourself out from under this for good, this murder, come talk to the state with me. And he did. I couldn't believe it.
Yeah, I almost fell over when he agreed to do that.
We took him right to 26th Street State,
Right.
talked to him, they put him in a grand jury. Like right then. There
Right
was a
then.
sitting grand jury,
Right.
he
Right.
put him in. And
Put him in.
And
That
now,
was-
Bill Moore's got a big old problem. Big old problem. One of them is D.C. Coleman, but that's the least of his problems. Like, his alibi is shot. So, and then a few days later, I get a call from, I'd like to give him credit if I can find his name, because that dude was so excited. He was ISP lab guy. And I got into work and had a message from him. And he's like, call me right away. And, well, I'll look for it later on, of course. But he's like, dude, it's a hit. It's a hit. That's him. I'm like, is that right? He said, yeah.
So now you've got the evidence you need,
Yeah.
and you have him denying that he's ever had contact with her.
Correct.
Yeah. And, but that's really when the work started, right? So that is 2004. And just to tell you how this goes, William Moore was indicted in 2008.
So that's a 4-year process. Even though you have his DNA,
Yeah.
you have his denial of contact,
Right.
it takes another 4 years to get him.
And why, you know, the defense wanted to make a lot of hay out of that, which makes sense, you know, but the truth of the matter is that's when the work really started, because we had to tie him up then. Those are good circumstantial things. Even the DNA, that's not circumstantial, that's physical evidence. The problem is DNA is probative. Most widely accepted forensic people say DNA can exist in the form of sperm in a body for 72 hours. But after that, it can dissipate. It's not reliable, whatever the scientific. So among the other things we had to do is we had to definitively tie up her prior 72 hours, which we did.
Yep. It took us that many years to get where we were at, which is with him. And now we got to do 2 more days additional.
Right.
Yeah. So it was a lot of work.
Really was. And we were able to do that by talking to her boyfriend, Juan Spruill, and all right, when with you, it's very important, man. When were you with her? And he was good. He's like, I was with her this time. And then talk to his mother and say, when can you account for time? This time. Same with her brother, her cousin.
Work.
Yeah.
And so there was no time period between her leaving the house and 72 hours prior where he could have come forward and say, sorry, I lied. I had sex with her, but I didn't kill her. Right? Because now we're a little bit stuck, right? I mean, the phone is good circumstantial, but
at this point, for the layman out there, I'm going to use the very commonly used term. You're eliminating any reasonable doubt.
Where timelining, we're accounting for her time and eliminating the possibility of her having sex with him the day before.
Right. Plus, to go back to something that we discussed in the last episode, you also have her undergarments and her pants, which have been tested for DNA.
That's
and
correct.
have come up negative.
Correct.
So, the combination of the timeline and that evidence is going to pinpoint the exact time of intercourse in the backseat of the car and no other.
And we also had to tie up his timeline from, say, 11:40 through, whatever time, 7 a.m. the next day, so he could say, well, I was with this person, or I was at work, or whatever. He could anybody we know, he could make up anybody, as he did with D.C. Coleman. But the people that we knew of in his work and those things, we had to make sure he couldn't say he was somewhere else during that period, which we're also able to do pretty definitively, So then plays out after that. We go to the state's attorney's office, fill in a review, and say, this is what we have, So now, in the interim, the law changed. Well, the first time I interviewed him, there was no Illinois statute to command that we videotape interviews with suspects.
So now you've got to re-interview.
As a matter of fact, you could not, by state law, without someone's consent, record them, which is still state law outside of the caveats of people being investigated for crimes. But so by state law, we couldn't. The first time I interviewed him, I couldn't. The only way I could have recorded him was ask for his permission to do that. And you're not going to do that in those cases. It doesn't make sense. But by the time we complete this investigation and tie up everything else, I think there was a couple other people that we needed to find an interview just to tie up, and we'd done that. What was the biggest time? The Nassau thing we had to deal with. That was a long time. So that had to be, that he had a very distinctive vehicle. He drove a big
station wagon.
Yeah, big like Impala station wagon,
or a Buick or something. It was a monster.
And we thought, man, if we can at all clean that video up and it's that car, he's done. You know what I mean? Like, so that video, we wanted to get to NASA to see, and what I said was 2007 by the time the tank commander was able to take it down there. So, I think that was the most of what took. So, but there was a lot of things to tie up. But anyway, so the state's attorney's office, they liked the case, but they said, what we need is for you to get him on video, since that law now, and have him repeat the same story, right? And so that's what we did.
How does that interview play out? Does he tell the same story, or has the story changed at this point?
It was great. I wasn't there. I don't know if I was on vacation or anything, but I know Mike did it.
Yeah, it played out exactly the same way. Right?
Same way.
I played it a little differently, but I got him in. We got to put out an investigative alert for him, which is a stop, for policemen that anybody sees him. And I think we had a gang team that found him for us and brought him in. So just walked him through it. But this time I played a little different tack. He was real friendly with me, which was, I think, just his nature, because he had been, he had worked with a commander so long. He felt comfortable around policemen. I think he really felt like.
Plus, nothing happened to him all that time from the first time.
Right.
So he figured,
good.
Why not?
Right.
And so the first thing,
he's got to be thinking 4 years. He's like,
he's in good
DNA
shape,
evidence,
right,
I'm clear. Like,
they would have already talked to me by now.
They would have arrested me by now.
Yeah.
So I went in and turned video on and Mirandized him again. And I said, hey, you want to talk to me about it? He said, yeah, I'll talk to you about Mike. And I said, and then I just glossed over his first story. I said, so you recall you told me this. I even went through the lies with him, but you admitted, right, that wasn't true. And he goes, yeah. And why did you, I did enough so to make it authentic. Why did you the Johnson switch. Well, man, I knew he had that made. I didn't want to. I just want to put myself near it. You know what I mean? Whatever.
Right.
And then, so I let him go through all that. And I said, then I hit him with the D.C. Coleman thing, you know. And I said, hey, man, I talked to D.C. and he didn't talk to her. He's already testified in front of the grand jury. And it gave him pause. And, I was still kind of walking this fine line with him because I desperately wanted to know what happened. You know, I wanted him to tell me. And I kept feeling like he was getting there. Because at one point he said, anytime I brought it up, and I tried to not bring it up very much because I needed to establish it, but I don't want to belabor it, was, you guys never had sex. Right? You never had any contact with her. And he said, no, I never did. And I said, well, look, man, it's your DNA inside. I said, and I kind of honed that the same way, like, and give him it. And that was a little bit pins and needles because he could have easily said, well, I'm sorry, I lied. I did have sex with her, but I didn't kill her, right? Which we closed that door pretty tightly with the 72 hours. But it does leave the possibility for a defense attorney to say, yeah, well, he left her there. Somebody else come along and kill her. How do you know that's not true? You know, like, well, then you're relying on the jury to believe, like, well, what's the likelihood of that, right? But still, it's a door I'd rather not have open, you know. And so I just wanted him to tell me what happened. I was just her and him there, and so I switched then to playing this empathy game, which this is a thing that we do a lot. That can be a tough thing to do, and it can be this happens a lot with child murders, child sexual killers, things like that, where you have to put yourself in a place where you're being empathetic to get them to talk. And those type of cases, not to get off on this tangent too much, but the child's gone. You only have this person's there. You need for them to tell you what happened. And contrary to what, anybody believes or would like for you to believe, you're not going to threaten or berate or torture somebody into admitting it. Never going to happen. It's just not. The way you have to do that is to be empathetic. And it can be tough and ugly. To be empathetic with a pedophile murder, it's hard. And you hear yourself saying shit that you
right. And in this particular case, you know or believe that this is the guy that brutally raped and murdered Maggie.
Yeah.
And so
I started switched and went down this road of saying, like, man, listen, I understand all this shit. You're not getting out from underneath this. You're not, dude. So now it becomes, how did it happen? Why did it happen? And you want to go in front of a jury with this story, man? I mean, that's ugly. But I understand, man. I'm divorced. I understand how things can go bad, and I just need to understand, And boy, he got close, and he got to a point where he was telling me, Mike, if I did this, that would make me a monster. I would be a monster. And a couple of times I said, no, I don't agree with that, Bill. I don't think that makes you a monster. You led a good life. I mean, does it make you a monster? You had this bad thing happen. And only you know why. It doesn't make you a monster unless you are a monster, and then explain to me what happened, And boy, there's a couple of times I'm just like, he's like, no, I'd be a monster. I'd be a monster, And I got, and so we reached this point where it wasn't going any further, and I think he needed medication too. He was on medication for something, so I needed to get him. We had to take him to a hospital because we can't give him his medication, right? And so I couldn't let that go very long. I didn't want to, and also you can't. You could hurt the case. So I said, well, let's take a break. And how soon you need medication, whatever. And he's like, well, I need to take it within 4 hours, whatever. I said, all right, let's get that taken care of, man. Because again, this is friendly. There's no antagonism. But then I go, I thought you were there, but I guess you.
No, I came in because I remember you coming out.
Okay. And so we got somebody to take him to the hospital for us. And then I was talking to Mike and Tank Commander. and a couple other guys in the office, and the state's attorney who was there for felony review. And I'm like, man, it's so close. I want it so bad. I want to hear him tell me what happened. But again, cooler, smarter heads prevailed, and they're like, even the state's attorney was like, I think he's done. He's done. He's painted himself into a corner. If you keep playing this game, I know we'd all like to hear him say he killed her.
Yeah, and the reason why.
Right.
But you're leaving all the time, leaving the door open for something ridiculous that's going to give the defense, something to hang their hat on.
Right.
And right now, what do they have?
So he comes back, and
at that point, I think it's done.
Yeah, state's attorney approved charges based on just that.
By the time he came back,
we had enough to get the charges approved.
And so. I think I just went and told that Bill, like, you're going to be charged with this murder. You go downstairs. And he was like, all right. He's friendly. He's like, I appreciate it. You know what I mean? Being treated the way you've treated me. I said, well, man, I appreciate you talking to me, whatever. Which also played well, I think, later, all that. It was very difficult for his defense to say that, like, I had threatened her.
Yeah, because we get, they always make accusations that we coerced something or threatened them or withheld medical attention, withheld meals. It's always us. The nicer you are, the more you give them, especially when you have enough. It's time to close the door at that point.
Yeah,
we'll never know, and as it turns out, we'll never know. No,
so the way it plays out then is we go to trial, and he had a public defender in the first trial, and at trial, his defense tried to hit hard on where we'd interviewed him and why, because he didn't tell her that he was an informant, which is kind of silly. Because, she wouldn't, I don't think, and we weren't going to bring that out at trial. There's no reason for it. It wasn't relevant. And we're not about fronting people off, even in that. We would for the case if it was necessary, but if it's not necessary, that's not our gig. We're not going to just unnecessarily front somebody off. But he fronted himself off because he wouldn't. And so she just kept hammering it to me. And it was actually Mike who was on the stand who finally just said, well, we did it there because he's been an informant for commander for 18 years or whatever. And she was like, whoa, now.
Eyeballs open. I can't imagine what was going through that defense attorney's head.
Yeah. But, I'm sure she was like, hey, dumbass. That would have been a good thing to tell your attorney. Yeah. So then the way this plays out, he's found guilty. And the judge was a good judge. I always liked that judge because he was hard on us. He was hard on the prosecution. He was hard on us. But if he felt like that we'd proven our case, he was hard on the defendants. He hammered them. And I like that kind of judge. I think that's the way it should be. Like, all right, we have the burden of proof, and we need to prove it. And if we do, then we deal with it.
Yeah, and we expect justice.
He sentenced him. Again, Bill Delaney, his partner, did a brilliant job of prosecuting this case. Like to the sexual assault, his defense attorney made the very kind of fair argument. Like, there is no proof she's raped. There's no trauma to her vagina, any of that stuff. There's no proof that she was raped. But
because one of the charges is criminal sexual assault.
Correct. And of course, the medical examiner testified that, often in rapes, there is no trauma.
There's no tearing. There's physical force.
But, Bill and his partner split the closing arguments. And his partner, we were able to sit down and did this brilliant job of saying, just taking crime scene photos and saying to the jury,
just show it.
Does this look like consensual sex? You know what I mean? And I was sitting in the what do you call it, the public section, watching this the gallery, and I was like, nicely done.
Yeah, we did that.
Done. Yeah. That's a tough one.
So convicted of all charges?
Yeah, life plus 30 years, right? So that was what, 2009, I think.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, and then so. We got pretty close with the family, her brother and mother.
Especially her
mom. Father was kind of, I think he went back to Poland. He was devastated by it, you can understand. But her mother and brother we'd gotten pretty close with, which you kind of try not to do, but it just happens. It's a course of things. They're good people. And of course they're Polish. So,
Yeah.
so she loved Mike and
She was very nice family.
always wanted to have food for us when we come by and that. And so they were very pleased and happy and closure's just the wrong word. I hear that a lot. People need closure. There's no closure. It's just answers. It is a door closing, but it doesn't. It's not like it makes it all go away.
Right. Maggie's still dead.
Gone.
And,
Right.
And Wanda, her mother,
and
visits.
both of them know that the last moments of her life were just horrible.
Yeah. Yeah. And they had to sit through that trial. And then it doesn't end there because our appellate court, which I'll keep my thoughts to myself, but we had notified a few years later that the appellate court has overturned it, sent it back for retrial.
I remember when that happened.
For retrial.
Yeah, I remember talking to you about that because I took that much too personally, in retrospect, but, and it was over this ridiculous thing where his attorney didn't object to the jury seeing my interview with him on video. And in that video, he admits to prior crimes and gang affiliation. And in order for a jury to hear that, the state has to lay the groundwork for that, meaning they have to have an agreement with a judge that we're going to bring in prior crimes and his gang affiliation because it's relative to the case. They didn't do that because it wasn't relative to this case.
And this is the second trial is with a different judge?
Yes. So what happens is, first of all, the reason that she didn't object is because they never saw that. They saw a redacted version where the state redacted all of that. So it wasn't even valid. But they said she should have objected anyway, sent it back for retrial. It's my personal opinion, and only my opinion, civil attorneys out there, that they just didn't like the sentence.
The length of the sentence.
Whatever. I have no proof of that. It's just my opinion. But anyway, it gets sent back for retrial. The judge who heard it the first time recused himself because he said, I believe this guy did it. I can't be impartial, which I respect, but so he hands it off to another judge and also a good judge. But when I say good judge, I mean like fair, tough, but similar. You got to prove the case if you do. So we had a retrial. This time he had a pro bono law firm representative, right? And that trial was a doozy, right? I mean, I don't know how many. That was the summer before I retired, I think. And he took the stand in that trial, which he had to. He had to explain away the DNA, And because here's the way this works at trial. When you're a witness, which as detectives who testify we are, you can't be in and listen to the
rest of the trial.
Right.
Anything.
The only thing you could be there is closing
arguments.
Right.
And then the jury's decision and all that and sentencing. But you can't be there for other witness testimony. So I wasn't privy to Bill Moore taking the stand. But again, Bill Delaney and his partner tried it for the state. And they're just damn fine attorneys. And of course, the law firm that was representing him were good attorneys as well. Actually, his public defender was a good attorney, thorough anyway. They tried to hammer away at a bunch of things that really didn't amount to much. They didn't have. And Bill was so good, and they tried to play a little bit more of, I put pressure on him in the interview and I was on it too much. And Bill had these great clips like, well, listen to this, because he's calling me, hey, Mike, how you doing? Mike, how you doing? Getting him food, talking to him. And he goes, and Bill would say, he'd play those little clips, almost like what we call TikTok clips now, right, for the jury. And then he'd be like, that sounds very coarse to me. Sounds like, he just did.
Sounds cordial.
It really was but he took the stand and he said in there, and I didn't even know this till recently when I read the transcripts. He appealed again in 2021, and this time the appellate court said, "You're dying in prison, my friend. You killed her," and that was that.
Yeah.
But in that appellate decision, I was able to read that his testimony was that, and this must have been terrible for her family to hear. When I read it, I thought, man, I don't often do this to myself. You know me as well as anybody. I mean, I sometimes you need to take more time out to say to yourself, like, nice job or whatever, and it's hard to do that, I think, especially like for us, because
It's just not in our nature.
No, it's not in our nature, and the wave of cases keep coming.
Yep.
So you start to congratulate yourself on one, and then the next one you're going to screw up, right? I mean, you gotta just keep, that's the job. But when I read his thing, I thought, well, we did a nice job on that, because he said that she had called him and he's at work, and that he agreed to pay her for sex, and she came to his house, and he paid her $200 for sex, and then she left, and he don't know what happened to her. All right, so now he's explaining his DNA. And I'm surprised the defense kind of let him get away with that particular story, but maybe that's all they had. I don't know, really. But, man, that don't work. That don't work. Because, and I know Bill had eaten him alive on the stand, but.
Because you guys had done this 72 hours prior.
Yeah, also, like, we had, when you mentioned earlier, the panties and the jeans. Pretty significant, right? Because what are the chances that she has sex? He said it was unprotected sex, right? Because he wants to explain his DNA being inside of her. Chances that she leaves there, puts her pants back on, drives away, and there's no leakage. It's pretty slim, right? But also, I mean, they don't live that close. I Google mapped it. I mean, this is when we were preparing for this podcast.
Right.
It's a 24-minute drive at 2 a.m. and this would have been like midnight, so closely. That's when I ran it from her where she was living to where he was living. Right. So no traffic. That's like no traffic. 24 minutes. So then physically impossible. That at 11:40 she leaves her house, drives to his house, has sex, and then drives back another. I think it was 17 minutes to where she's found killed.
Right.
And is stripped naked, shot, and murdered.
Right.
It is a logistical impossibility. And so I'm sure Bill hit on that. I don't recall now, but it's unnecessary. Like,
so he's found guilty a second time?
Found guilty a second time is great because the judge sentenced life plus 30 years. Yep. Same exact thing, And then about a year ago, I got notified that he had died in prison. And we were just talking about that while we were taking, earlier before the show. And even at that, I called his Maggie's brother and mother and told him, he had passed away. And the strength of these homicide victims' families never ceases to amaze me.
Yeah. How I look at all the time, the amount of time that it took to her death till he got convicted, and then sent back for retrial. And then again, long time for a family. And they're reliving it the whole time. When you think it's done, it's not done. And that's where how we started this thing, when we say you take the puzzle and throw it. And we put it all together. The only piece that we could not find was why. Why we didn't have the opportunity. And, I can live with that.
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, we were just having this. I mean, as Cormac McCarthy says eloquently, at some point you have to put a tourniquet on it, right? I mean, but when I heard that he died, I got notified from IDOC, the Illinois Department of Corrections, that he had died in prison. I was like, damn it, man. I wish I'd known that he was sick. I'd like to go and try to talk to him one more time just to see if he would tell me, how did it happen? Why did it happen, But as we were talking outside, I mean, we did everything we could do,
right?
And you got to put a tourniquet on it. In the end, I think I know what happened. I think we've talked about this.
I think we have a pretty good idea.
She, in the end, I think she was just a playful girl who would kind of tease and play with guys and was borrowing money. She wanted to move out of her parents' house to move in with her boyfriend. So she was borrowing money from somebody. So I think it was probably pretty easy for him to kind of, I'll lend you some money, meet me over here, whatever. And he, I think in my head, he decides, I give her money, we're having sex, right? So he's clearly got a gun on him. I'm extrapolating out a story here, clearly. It's just my opinion. But I think what happens is he forces her in the back seat, forces her to have sex, and then she tells him, I'm calling the police. I think it's just that simple. Could have been a number of things, but I think it's just that simple. I'm going to report this to the police. He's been around. He knows. And a telling thing with this, I mentioned earlier he'd gotten arrested for domestic disturbance.
Right.
We went down and talked to that woman, and she told a really fascinating. She said she met him. She worked at Cubs Foods, and she said they went out a few times. It was fine, but she goes, I just didn't think he was really into me because he wasn't calling me back. He wasn't. He goes, then one day I go out with this guy friend of mine. He goes, we're not even dating, we're just friends. And he drops me in front of she lived down the south side. He said, my friend drops me off in front of my mom's house. She goes, I think I did give him like a little peck on the cheek, but that was it. He goes, I get out of the car, I'm walking to my house, and she goes, Bill Moore comes walking up. And he's like, what are you doing? He goes, who's that? And she goes, it's just a friend of mine. He goes, well, I'd like to talk to you a little bit. She goes, well, all right, come inside. So she's living with her mother, who's like an 80-year-old, woman, African-American woman. And so she said, goes in the bedroom, her bedroom, says hi to her mom. She goes in the bedroom with Bill Moore, and he flips. He switched, turned into, I didn't recognize him. It's terrifying. He broke her arm or wrist or something, grabbed her, or maybe it was her, I don't remember, but her mother heard a commotion, came with a pistol, put a pistol to him, and said, get out, I'm going to kill you. And he did. And it's interesting part of that, when I'm interviewing him on video, I mentioned that. He goes, yeah, man, hey. He denied it was physical, right? But he does say,
the mother.
That crazy mother pulled a gun on me, and I think she was going to kill me, So I think if you think about that story and the way she described him flipping, I think
something set him off.
Yeah, something set him off, and he goes.
We can speculate.
He goes brutal quickly, and that's how it ended. And I have to live with that. I don't have another answer, but I know he killed her.
Yeah, that's
tough end to a young life.
Yeah, I mean, 21 years old. Yeah. She had everything in front of her. She didn't do anything. You can argue like. And I get this a lot. I get, my daughter always wants to know, what could they have done differently? Well, look, all right, it's probably not the best idea to go call somebody and go meet them at midnight in some isolated place, right? I mean, I don't think I have to preach that to anybody. I mean, so that I wish she'd have done differently. But she didn't. There's nothing that we found or saw that led us to believe that she she had no drugs in her system, no alcohol in her system. I mean, her cousin told us on her 21st birthday, she went out and had one drink or something. You know what I mean? Like, she didn't have any lifestyle.
She had no history, nothing to indicate that she had done something to him. And we talked to enough people that, she lost her temper.
I think maybe she over flirted, played that a little bit too much with a guy and she had no idea how dangerous he was.
Right.
You know what I mean? Maybe that's the answer. I don't know, but that's it, man. That's the story. So
I can't think of anything else.
I got nothing else either.
All right.
How does that feel for you?
Feels good.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah. All right. Hey, thank you very much for joining us. I appreciate you jumping in again. And if you have questions, my email address is in the show notes. Feel free to jump in about this case or anything else. And I have not been able to get in touch with Maggie's family as yet, but I'll continue to do this hopefully before this, this goes live. And if I can, and they like to have a voice in this, I'll certainly give it to them. I'd like to say thanks to my close friend,
you're welcome, Michael.
partner, Mike Pietryla, a real American hero and city hero. There's no doubt about it. And my brother, Chris Kafcas, who is a hero to the working man and everybody in this city. Thank you very much for joining us, and we'll see you next time.
Thanks.
Thanks.
So there you have it. The case of Magdalena Idzikowska, Maggie. As you could tell, it was a long and, emotional and trying case. Just went on a long time, and having to retry it, put the family through it a second time. It was a lot. And, I'll speak to her family a little bit here. I make every effort that I can here on this podcast or this show to reach out to the victims' families, to give them the opportunity to say, yeah, I don't want to talk about her. Yes, I'd like to talk about my family members. Been successful with that with some, and others not so much. There's a lot that goes into that, as you can imagine. In this case, Maggie's family, had a really strong connection relationship with them, as you'd expect over the course of 15 years. You get to know the family pretty well. And I will tell you, her family are just exceptional people. Her brother, her mother, her father, I didn't have much interaction with. This whole process was very difficult for him, I think. And, he had all the emotion that you have the right to when you lose a daughter. And I know he moved back to Poland for some time. Her mother and her brother, I had a lot of interaction with. They're tremendous human beings. Her mother had been a nurse in Poland before she moved here, so she had has an amazing constitution. And though she was devastated by Maggie's death, and will always be there with her, she could have really tough conversations, and I always admired her for that. Her brother is an amazing human being as well. A lot of respect for them both. I did reach out for them, and I've not heard back. But to be fair, I've not really pushed that issue. They, as you could tell, probably in the description of that case, they went through a lot. And I think at some point I wanted to give them the opportunity. On the other hand, I don't want to take advantage of that relationship or push them outside of their comfort zone. They've been through enough, and they've moved on with their lives. I don't, if they hear this, I think they know that I'm thinking about them, and I have their concern in my heart as always. I'm always happy to talk to them, but I was not going to be in a position where I was pushing them to be involved in something that, they might not want to be a part of. If I hear from them in the future, I will certainly let you, my listeners, know. If they want to come on and talk about Maggie, of course, you'll hear that. But as for now, I wish them the best, and I know even doing this episode is going to be somewhat traumatic for them, but they have my utmost respect and concern as always. Okay, so beyond that, if you have questions about the case or there are things that are unanswered, please reach out to me. Happy to do it. There's a lot that went into this. I know there is. William Moore died in prison. He had a multitude of health problems, and I will be honest with you. When I heard that he had died in prison, there's probably some relief to it. And I certainly let the family know right away. Their big concern was they had kind of moved on and forgiven him. Their big concern was that he could never get out and hurt anybody again. So I think that closed that door for them. For me personally, I got to admit, I would like to have one more opportunity to talk to him to see if he would just kind of come clean with the final moments of Maggie's life and tell me what happened. It's kind of here and there. That's just one of those doors you like to have shut as a homicide detective, but you have to understand that it may just never work that way. There is no doubt that William Moore killed Magdalena, and the physical evidence, the circumstantial evidence, his own lies, even in, reading the final appeal that he did with the Illinois State Supreme Court, which I'll put a link to in the show notes here, where they finally just rejected all of his claims and basically said, they found that he was guilty and was not going to get out of prison. They talked about, which I didn't have access to, we talked a little bit about in the episode, his statements in court where he did testify at the second trial. And the reason you don't have access, as I talked about, I'm a witness. I'm part of the investigation. So I can't be in, except for opening, closing arguments. I can't really be in the case where we have people testifying, so as not to eschew my testimony or any witness testimony. But later, I learned about his testimony. And of course, the great state's attorney who prosecuted this case, Bill Delaney, really beat him up on the stand because he had lied so much and he was so inconsistent in his stories. His attorney was represented at that time by pro bono law firm, very good law firm. He got a very good defense, but their hands were tied by the fact that he had lied so much and told so many different stories and painted himself into such a corner. But it was very telling to know that, he tried to explain away her DNA by saying that she had come to his house and they'd had sexual relations there. And then she hadn't washed herself and she'd left immediately. Very convenient, right, for the evidence to try and explain away the evidence in the case, which he lied about up to that point. But of course, that didn't hold water for a couple of reasons. One, we had the outstanding work from the Illinois State Police Crime Lab technician in 2004 that told us that she had no DNA in the way of sperm in her panties or her jeans, which makes it a near impossibility that she'd had sex. Now, cleaned herself and left her apartment, right? That makes sense. That's not probably an absolute, but it's in that 99 percentile range, right? So that makes it very difficult. What really puts it over the top is the time frame of how long it would have taken her to drive from her house to his house and then end up on the scene where we know based on the really poor video quality, but good enough quality that we could tell that she had arrived on the scene right at midnight. It is an impossibility for her to have left her apartment after the phone call, driven to his place on the west side, and then ended up on the scene in the time frame. A complete impossibility, because you're talking about what was the period, 20 minutes, where she left from the phone call, left her house, and ended up on the scene. It is, I think, at a high rate of speed, with catching all the lights and everything else, 18 minutes to his apartment, and then like another 16 minutes or 15 minutes back to the scene. So there's 34 minutes that doesn't include whatever time he claimed they had there. It is a physical impossibility that she did as he claimed on the stand. So he was lying again. The jury saw through it and rightfully convicted him. So what's missing in there, of course, that we'd all like to know, and as a homicide detective, you'd really like to know, is I had him tell me exactly what transpired. What that really matters, it does not. I know that he killed her. The circumstances there are not going to be pretty. They're not going to be fun to hear, but that's the nature of, I guess, being who I am and the people I worked with. As you heard Mike say, we would like to close all those doors, and more often than not, they don't get closed. Didn't happen. I'm satisfied with the way that worked out. We got justice for Maggie. We got justice for her family, and William Moore was not able to ever hurt anybody again. So that's what it is. I think that's all I have for this case. We'll be moving on to other cases. We've got some open cases we're going to be looking at. I'm going to be partnering with some of the guys I worked with, some of the people I worked with, to try and get resolution to some still open cases. I'll be talking about some other cases I worked on that were of interest and some of my partners worked on, I think you'll enjoy. So that's all I got for today. Thank you very much again for joining in. It really means a lot to me. To help us continue to move forward, please support the show in whatever way you can. Like it, subscribe, download the episodes, and leave us a review. It helps us a great deal. So until next time, thank you again. Take care of yourself, be safe, and take care of each other.